Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Len Rydell, the Executive Director of the Blue and Gray Education Society. I'd like to welcome you. Hard to believe, but this is the 10th weekly interview that we have done on our Zoom series, in which what we're intending to do is introduce you and bridge the gap between the COVID-induced step down and our intentions to restart our tour program. Things are looking up. I get my second COVID shot on the 15th, and my wife got her second one today. And we've got our first program is going to be conducted in Dalton, Georgia, at the end of April. Bob Jenkins will do Dalton and Resaca. That's going to be a caravan tour. We were going to start with Shiloh the first week in April, and of all things, there's a big step down of the paper plant there, and all the hotel rooms are filled for 10 days there, including the time we were going to do it. So we have just confirmed and moved the Shiloh program with Greg Mertz to May 12th through the 15th at Pickwick Landing. That too will be a caravan program, and then we're hoping that the restrictions will lighten up a bit, and that we'll be able to get back to some sort of a pseudo regularity with Saratoga at the start of June and other programs that come on after that. Of course, tonight Dennis Frye is going to be with us, and Dennis is going to do two topics over a weekend, the 31st of July and the 1st of August. One day we'll devote to John Brown's raid, and the second day we'll devote to Stonewall Jackson in and around Harpers Ferry, which I think will be a pretty exciting thing to do. And then we're hoping that the rest of the season will unfold as normal. However, the reception that we've gotten for these programs has been really remarkable. We've usually averaged anywhere from 25 up to 60 people who have shown up for these lectures. Now, just a reminder of the rules. Many of you have been with us several times before, but what I'd like to remind you of the rules is, as Karen has put up here, is that you all are in an observation mode. You don't and you should not have a hot mic at all. This is a conversation between Dennis and myself, and we have a set of lecture or a set of questions that we're going to go through that we should finish somewhere around 20 minutes of 8. We encourage you to interface with us and to ask questions. The manner in which you would do that is to use your chat button on that. Don't raise your hand. I'm not going to call on people, but just type in your question if you have one. And while Dennis is talking about something else, I will screen questions that are asked, and I'll determine if and where and when to interface those into the conversation so that the conversation continues to go well. We will finish right around, last question will be at 5 minutes of 9, and or the first question after that, and then we finish with that question and do just a wind down. We generally finish anywhere from 58 minutes to about an hour and 3 or 4 minutes, and we've been consistently doing that. If you have to leave for some reason, or if you want to see it again, as many of you have noticed, our host, Karen Needles, will be recording this, and we will link it to the next announcement. We're actually going to skip next week for a number of reasons, and then we'll be back again on the 22nd with Brian Wills and Norm Dazinger talking about our Straits Raid program. It's going to take place in believe they're late June when we're going to do that program. So they're going to talk about that, and then we'll continue on. And once we get through the first 20 or so, 25 of these weekly lectures, we'll start hitting other programs. We'll start to look at 2022 as well. So this looks like it's going to be a hearty perennial for the next for the next year at least. And we welcome you to come to these and I hope you enjoy them. You can also watch any of them if you've missed some of these. They're all at our YouTube channel, which is free. And you just have to sign up for the Blue and Gray YouTube. I've sent out numerous emails about that. If you might want to go back and look at those again, I'll send it out again for those you want. But on there, we've got about 15 presentations are on the free YouTube channel. So all of that is really exciting for us, and we're delighted to have you. Karen, do you want to add anything before we get started? Before we actually start, because I got a few minutes, and I have done this before. Some of you have heard this before, and if you've heard it, please listen to me and do something with it. You'll notice up there the Lincoln Archives digital project. I've known Karen Needles. We're all old friends. Any of you who checked in early saw Dennis, Karen, and I talking. We've known each other for a long time, and all that time, Karen has devoted herself to being immersed in the National Archives and the archives of the Lincoln administration, and she has done a phenomenal job. If you have never visited her Lincoln Archives website, please do. There's all sorts of neat things there. There's stuff such as the she'll put this up in a second, I hope, but she's got lectures on there. She's got documents. She's scanned and put up all the records of the trial of the 39 Indians that were sentenced to death and hanged by Lincoln's orders up in Mankato, Minnesota. She has the records of the Lincoln assassination trial and so forth. And there you go. And, you look around here, it's just fun to be on there. And the site is free. There's absolutely nothing. You don't have to pay a penny to do that. Having said that, though, know that people like Karen work their butts off to present and provide this stuff to you. And she doesn't charge anything for it, but she certainly can use the support. So there is an opportunity there to make a donation. It's not a tax deductible donation, unfortunately, because she has not organized that way. But I certainly encourage you to do that and help if you can. I mean, it helps Karen pay the bills, and she's been locked down for a year as well. She can't get access to the National Archives, but there's so much to do and so much interesting stuff there that she's just showing you some bits and pieces there. So go take a look at it, pay attention. It's lincolnarchives.org, and if you can help, do so. Otherwise, just enjoy it and see what's out there, because you may never go to the National Archives, but Karen is bringing it to you. So with that, I say thank you and atta girl, Karen. Great project, and now let's get to work. So good evening, Dennis. How you doing?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. It's great to be with you and all the friends of Blue and Gray Education Society.
Well, it's great to have you back again. And, we've known each other, 25, 26 years now. And
yeah, if you want to feel old, why don't you just call it a quarter of a century?
Good Lord, yes. It goes back. I remember the APCWS, the annual conferences, the things that we worked together on early on, and the preservation conferences that I did for you guys when I was trying to find a nickel to pay my bills. And you guys were very helpful. You and Will Green were wonderful to work with us, and you planted your seeds well. I mean, we're 27 years now and we're still here, and you're still here.
I'm so excited for you and BGES. In fact, I was complimenting you earlier on how impressed I've been with how you steered the organization through this extremely difficult year. And I congratulate you, commend you for your leadership and for all the devotion and dedication of the members. This is a tough year. And BGES is continuing to thrive and come up with very new approaches to bring history to the membership and to those that you may be able to encourage to join as well. So congratulations to you and all of you for making it through this very difficult year and actually thriving. Well done.
Thank you very much, Dennis. You recently retired from the Park Service. I mean, you with such a storied career and everything. We don't need to go back through all of that, but what have you been doing since you retired, and what's on the calendar for you?
Well, there's three things that are really important to me in retirement. One is continuing to research and write history, and to share history with as many people as I possibly can. So I really appreciate this opportunity this evening to share with your members. A second thing is I love to walk. I love to spend time in the woods. And I've got lots of mountains here in Western Maryland and around Harpers Ferry that have always been home to me. And as a kid, my favorite playground was the mountain. And so I'm going back to my playground in retirement. And it's almost a day that doesn't go by that I'm not out walking or hiking somewhere in a mountain. The Appalachian Trail's only a few minutes from my home. And so I really enjoy spending time outdoors. And, you know, being a national park ranger for almost 40 years, one of the reasons people join the Park Service is to spend time outdoors. So I'm continuing that in my retirement. And finally, Lynn, you might remember, I love baseball. I'm so happy baseball season is back. And I just, I crave the game. I enjoy so many aspects of the game. And one of the great things about retirement is I can actually watch spring training games on Major League Baseball Network. And that is a blast. I love it. So, you know, a lot of people spend time doing this, what do they call it, where you sit down and you watch movies for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it's nonstop. That's what I do with baseball. I enjoy baseball so much that I can do that and just never tire of it. So retirement is great. I commend it to any and all. And if you're not there yet, make sure you get there because you deserve it to yourself.
Gosh, you know, maybe I'll just go off tomorrow and I won't come back. You know, I'm hoping, you know, Neil Mangum and I try to go to spring training because he's an Indians fan and I'm a Reds fan. And I'm a Red Sox fan. You're a Red Sox?
Oh, yeah.
Fine.
The 21st century has been really good to me. I mean, I can't be happier in the 21st century as a Boston Red Sox fan.
Oh, I understand. It's a good time. Tell me a little bit about, you know, you are a creature of Western Maryland. I've always known you that way, and you've never deviated far from that. Tell me about Western Maryland and what really sings to you about where you live and where you grew up.
Well, you know, I live in Washington County, Maryland. I'm a native of Washington County. A lot of people don't realize that the very first Washington County in the United States is my county. My county was formed, get this now, on September the 6th, 1776.
Really?
Yes, really. Now, you are a military historian, and you know what George Washington is doing in September 1776. He's getting his butt kicked.
That's right.
So the people in my county decide to name their county after the biggest traitor on the planet, George Washington. Now that takes some, well, you know what that takes. And so you know, I love my county. It's just beautiful. And the other thing about Washington County, Maryland, as all of you know, even though you're listening from all over the country and watching from everywhere, Maryland is this small state, not the smallest, but small state that gets very, very narrow as you go from the Chesapeake Bay west, very narrow. And in fact, at one point, the state of Maryland is only 1.5 miles in width from the Potomac River to the Mason-Dixon line, 1.5 miles width. That's where Washington County is. And so Washington County became the natural avenue of invasion for the Confederate armies to go north because we were the narrowest part of the state. You could go from Virginia, today West Virginia, into Pennsylvania quickly, easily, with little difficulty. And so, you know, I am right in the heart of Civil War country. And in fact, when I was a little boy, one of my favorite things was to walk with my other friends that were fourth graders and fifth graders. We would walk 4 miles one way, 4 miles, to go play in the Civil War forts on Maryland Heights that overlook Harpers Ferry. And we used to always, when we would play war, we would always say, we don't need to build our forts. We're playing in the forts that were built by real soldiers. And so that literally was my playground. That was my backyard when I was a kid. And boy, that just infused the Civil War in me. And I just adore Western Maryland. It's beautiful, it's historic, and it's got a very unique culture. It's been home. It's been home, and I couldn't have selected a better place to. I should give that credit to my parents. Couldn't find a better place to grow up.
That's cool. I remember a number of years ago, the Kennedy farm where John Brown staged his raid was way off the beaten path. When did it come into the National Park Service, and what role did you play in the interpretation and presentation of the site?
Well, first of all, that's genetic, and let me explain. My father, John Frye, has been the unofficial historian of Washington County for nearly 70 years. Dad's still living, and he just, you want to know anything about Washington County, you would talk to John Frye. And my dad was actually the person who led Captain South Lynn to the Kennedy farm. And Captain Lynn bought it in 1973 at the suggestion of my father. He came into the county. He wanted to find some historic site that he could put some money into and restore. And my dad said, I've got just the place for you. And it was the Kennedy farm, John Brown's headquarters, where he planned and staged the raid upon Harpers Ferry, where he launched his war against slavery. And so the Lynn family still owns it, Captain. It's Lynn. They still own it. It has never actually transferred to the National Park Service, but the National Park Service has worked very closely in cooperation with the Lynn family. As example, when the restoration of the building was done in 1978, 1979, 1980, the Park Service loaned to the Lynn family the chief architect, the chief historical architect at Harpers Ferry National Park, who did all the architectural drawings and the architectural supervision of the restoration of the Kennedy farm or John Brown's headquarters. So we've had a very, very close relationship, close collaboration. I love the Lynn family. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money to save this very, very historic site. And it is remote, it is out there, and that's exactly why John Brown chose it as his headquarters.
Is there any thought in the future, without telling stories out of school? Is there a thought that this may come into the Park Service at some point in the future, or do you think it just continue to be a collaborative relationship between the Park Service and the Lynn family?
I see the collaboration continuing for quite some time between the private sector and the National Park Service. Captain Lynn's son, Sprig, is just as passionate about the John Brown headquarters and the Kennedy farm as his father is. And Sprig has really now taken over the principal management of the property and is doing great things, getting lots of grant money for it, making great partnerships with other communities, including the African American community. And so I'm very excited for Sprig and the future of the site. Sprig talks to me often as a consultant for him, not paid, just because I'm interested. And someday, maybe it'll see some sort of other type of protection from another entity. But right now, it's in the most caring hands imaginable. The Sprig Lynn and the Lynn family, they're great caretakers of history.
Looking forward to seeing it again. Speaking of John Brown, we're going to spend an entire day on the Brown raid and so forth. How about giving us a Cliff Notes version of John Brown and the raid, and why here and why is it important?
Well, first of all, we've called it for generations the John Brown raid. That will insult Brown. It was not a raid. John Brown launched a war against the United States from his headquarters and his attack at Harpers Ferry. It was no raid. It was intended to establish an army that was going to fight against the established legal and what seemed to Brown perpetual existence of slavery as an institution. He intended to end it, and he intended to start that end with his attack at Harpers Ferry. The reason he chose Harpers Ferry was because of the United States Armory and Arsenal. We had 100,000 weapons stored at Harpers Ferry at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. 100,000, Lynn. Think about that for a moment. We had enough weapons in that arsenal in 1859 to arm U.S. Grant and George Meade's Army of the Potomac at the beginning of the Overland Campaign. That's how many weapons we had in that arsenal. So that became Brown's target. And these were United States rifles and muskets manufactured by United States Armory, by armorers employed by the United States. These weren't hunting rifles. These were meant to go into the hands of soldiers defending this country. So Brown needed weapons. He always needed weapons. Even when he was in Kansas, he was always in search of weapons. And so I'll just come take them, he says. And that would be the beginning of his war. The short of it is he attacks. He gets trapped there. It's a great story. And it's a story that's best told in Harpers Ferry because we can tell you about all the action blow by blow. He gets entrapped in Harpers Ferry, eventually in the fire engine house of the Army, which was his central command station. The reason he was using that was not because it was a fire engine house, but because it was centrally located. That was his communications and nerve center during his attack. He eventually gets trapped there, surrounded there, and United States Marines are called in by the President of the United States. They come in from Washington and the Washington Navy Yard. They are led by, of course, a person that was never a Marine, Robert E. Lee. And Lee then leads the assault against the fire engine house, and Brown is taken alive. He's removed from Harpers Ferry and taken to nearby Charlestown. We'll be visiting Charlestown, and there's numerous sites in Charlestown that are extant from the period of the John Brown raid, which are really, really interesting to visit. We're going to go there. And there he'll be placed on trial, and he'll be tried for murder. People will be killed during the attack, including the mayor of Harpers Ferry. Treason. Brown actually has his own constitution. He's going to create his own government for his own management, his own leadership. He's not going to be the president. He is the commander in chief, but he's not the president of this new government. And so he's tried for treason, and he's tried for inciting slave rebellion. Brown will be found guilty by a Jefferson County Circuit Court on all three of those counts. Each one of those is a felony with a death penalty, and the judge will decide that the best response for John Brown is the noose. And so 6 weeks, there we have a picture of him literally riding the wagon. That wagon still is extant. That wagon is in the Jefferson County Museum in downtown Charlestown. The wagon you see.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And so there Brown is sitting on his coffin en route to his execution site, which was about 3 blocks from the courthouse where he would be tried and convicted. And on December the 2nd, 1859, now get this, Lynn, 6 weeks after his capture, 6 weeks, quick justice. Brown ascends the scaffold, rope placed around his neck, and of course the execution occurs. Now, I'm going to share with you Brown's final words. He did not utter these words. Alive as a human being, John Brown never said this, never. But he wrote it. Before he left the jail that December morning, he wrote his final words on a note. And he handed that note to his jailer, who he had actually befriended. Well, the jailer's pretty busy right now. He doesn't have time to read John Brown's note. And so the execution occurs, and after Brown has been proclaimed dead, the jailer recalls that he had been handed something by Brown, his prisoner. And so he pulls it out of his frock coat pocket, and he opens Brown's final note. And these were his final words. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood.
Think on it. And of course, he's prophetic. Is exactly what happens. You know, there were so many people. You know, we followed Brown, and and we know he's involved in Bleeding Kansas and so forth. In your years of looking at this and stuff, who are the 3 or 4 key people outside of Brown that don't get enough sunlight in this raid? The people who supported it, people like that, people who are with Brown or people who confronted Brown. Who are the intriguing characters to you in the John Brown story?
Well, I don't have enough time to answer that question now. You have to go on the tour. And you need to, did you like that? Did you like the way I marketed the tour?
That was pretty good, but give me 4 anyway. You don't get off that easy, Frye. Give me 4.
Brown had an intriguing group of people in New England and New York State who supported him that were very, very well-known people. As example, one of them was the wealthiest man in the state of New York in 1859 and 1860. Garrett Smith, now that's a name that you don't know, and it's a name that history doesn't know, but Garrett Smith was the richest man in the state of New York. Strong supporter, proponent of Brown, gave Brown a lot of money. Now, we would call that today conspiracy. Well, he's a conspirator. This man knew Brown, spoke with Brown, met with Brown, and gave a lot of money to Brown. He was very dedicated to abolition. He did not, however, we would call him a conspirator by legal terms, but he doesn't know what Brown's plan is. He doesn't. He only knows that Brown intends to do something to bring about an end to slavery, but he knows no details of the plan. I'll give this to Brown. Brown knew how to keep a secret pretty well. Brown talked a lot, but he didn't talk details much. And people knew that Brown was violent. People knew that Brown was willing to use violence. This is what distinguished him from most abolitionists. Most abolitionists were not willing to go the violent route to bring it in to eradicate slavery. Brown was, and Brown made it very forward and advanced that this is the way we have to do it. There is no other recourse. We must use violence. So they were aware of this. These people that supported Brown knew that violence was going to occur, but they knew none of the details. And so Smith, incriminating evidence was discovered at the Kennedy farm at Brown's headquarters that shows that this man obviously was involved with John Brown, and it frightened him to no end, of course, and he went insane. Although it turned out to be momentary insanity, he actually went into an asylum. But that's a good example of the type of people that supported Brown. Let's go to Concord, Massachusetts, that hotbed of New England intellectual thought. There were people in Concord that we all know as great poets, great writers. They are such icons in American literature, and we respect them and we revere them. These were people who were willing to support the violent overthrow of slavery because they felt there were really no other solutions, that the law wasn't going to change, if compromise was no longer possible. And so people like Thoreau, Emerson, Franklin Sanborn, these people, the Alcotts, Bronson Alcott, Louisa May Alcott, they all knew Brown. They had dinner with Brown. They welcomed Brown into their parlors. I've sat on Franklin Sanborn's sofa that no doubt John Brown sat on that sofa, no question. And so there was a group called the Secret Six, and here are the people that you see that represent the Secret Six. And these men, again, were people who were either preachers or writers. All of them were intellectuals who were very supportive of Brown. And they weren't very secret after Brown was discovered and his attack at Harpers Ferry failed. But many of these people just stood up and said, yep, absolutely. I support Brown, believe in Brown, and we're going to eradicate slavery. We're going to bring an end to it. And you know something, that we have to be violent, then violence is going to have to occur. And so that just gives you a few examples of some of the people that were, and Frederick Douglass, of course. Frederick Douglass, now, Douglass, but Douglass and Brown were very close. They were good friends. Brown had invited Douglass to join him in his launch of his war at Harper's Ferry. Douglass refused. They met in August of 1859. Now, remember, the attack occurs in the middle of October, so this was about 2 months. Now, but Douglass and Brown met at a quarry in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. The whole plan was laid out to Douglass. Brown kept nothing from Douglass, and he wanted Douglass. He needed Douglass. He felt that Douglass was essential to success as being the one of the if not the most leading and well-known African American in the country at that time. Brown wanted him by his side, and Douglass concurred with so much of what Brown wanted to do, and actually felt that if violence is necessary, now is the time. But he did not believe that the plan could work, and he would write that if he went into Harper's Ferry, that Brown would be going into, and I quote, a perfect steel trap. Douglass would write later that he often regretted that he did not join Brown, that he did not have the courage to join Brown. But he was a great admirer of Brown, and he came back to Harper's Ferry in the 1880s and did a marvelous lecture on John Brown at Storr College. We'll go visit that site, and we'll probably read some passages from Douglass's great oratory about John Brown right on the Storr College campus, which is today owned by the National Park Service.
You know, a fascinating aspect of that, you talked about the Secret Six and so forth. And of course, we remember from the Kansas territory in the debates over Kansas that the Massachusetts Immigrant Aid Society was specifically set up as a political counterbalance to try to bring enough free state people into Kansas that they would be able to affect the elections there and the organization of the new territory into a state, and so you get that polarity between Lawrence, Kansas, and the people along the border. That it was, and of course Brown is in the middle of all this as well, because he's in Kansas, and so he sees all of this effort to try to save new territories for freedom and free state and free labor.
Brown is known for his guerrilla warfare, very successful guerrilla warfare efforts in Kansas. Karen, our host, is a Kansan, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier about all of Brown's activities in southeastern Kansas. I will say this: Brown, place called Pottawatomie Creek, there was a massacre at the hands of John Brown and his men. And people literally were cut into pieces using artillery broadswords. It was ugly, it was brutal, it was even, it's just indescribable, this carnage that occurred at the hands of Brown and his men. They executed some pro-slavery people. Well, you know what? It worked because it terrified people. Now, notice that when we use the word terrify, it sounds an awful lot like terrorist. Now, I'm not calling Brown a terrorist, and I'm not suggesting that he's a terrorist, but let me tell you something. He knew how to use terror to advantage. And the Pottawatomie massacres did more to keep pro-slavery people out of Kansas than virtually any other activity during this guerrilla warfare. The word spread that this is what will happen to you if you come here to expand slavery. I'll be looking for you, and this is what the result will be. He only had to do it once. And the fascinating thing about Brown is that he would, forevermore, until his life would end in 1859, he would deny that he killed anyone. We don't know if Brown killed anyone at Potawatomi, but we know he was there, and we know his men did kill those people. And those people in New England and New York realized that this was a man of violence who was not afraid to use violence to bring it into slavery, because in John Brown's mind, and he believed this, the most violent act against a human being was enslavement.
I want to ask one more question before we rotate over and talk about Stonewall. And it's an opinion question, Dennis. You know, what I'm wondering about is the state of Virginia. The offense took place in the state of Virginia. However, it took place on a federal installation, and one wonders in the wake of how Virginia handled this. Of course, history tells us that Virginia took jurisdiction. They tried him, and he was executed under Virginia laws. And the state of Virginia sent the Virginia Military Institute under Stonewall Jackson, Thomas Jackson at the time, an instructor at VMI, to ensure that order was kept there as Virginia disposed of their insurrectionists. What do you think might have been the result had the federal government, had Lee taken Brown, and they had taken him and bound him up in D.C. and tried him in federal court? Do you see any difference, or do you see any difference in the national impact that it had with the execution?
I think I can answer this with two words: Pontius Pilate. Now, what in the world am I talking about? Pontius Pilate is 1,859 years before John Brown, but we have a Pontius Pilate in this scene, and his name is James Buchanan. The President of the United States, when this occurs, Buchanan, a Pennsylvanian, a Democrat. Of course, Democrats at that time received much of their support from the South. And Buchanan was what we refer to as a doughface, a Northern Democrat who basically gets elected on Southern support. Buchanan, he did not want to touch Brown. He did not want to have the federal government dealing with Brown at all. And so President Buchanan acquiesced to the request of the governor of Virginia, Henry Wise. The governor says, "We want him. We want him." And President Buchanan pulled a Pontius Pilate. He basically says, "Well, you know something? I'm going to wash my hands. Even though this all occurred on federal property, even though this is a federal crime, even though he was captured by federal troops, even though he assaulted a federal installation, and even though he captured federal weapons, I think we'll turn him over to Virginia, and we'll let Virginia deal with him." And so it was a classic Pontius Pilate move. And this was very satisfactory to Virginia, of course. Virginia was the oldest of the southern states. Virginia was the oldest of the United States. And Virginia was the oldest slave state. Virginia felt that it had been physically assaulted, that it had been attacked. Here's the word they used at the time, Lynn, and you read it over and again in the newspapers: we were invaded. We were invaded. This was an invasion. Oh yeah, these are Americans invading a southern state, so to speak, but it's an invasion. And so Virginia was very, very happy to be able to represent all of the South, all of the southern states. It was emblematic of the South. And so Buchanan was happy that he didn't have to deal with it. Governor Wise, who had his own ambitions to someday sit himself in the White House, he saw this as an opportunity to gain national recognition and to raise his reputation to the national level as a possible Democratic candidate in the 1860 elections. And so Virginia got him. And it was today that would not happen at all. Today, this absolutely would be in the jurisdiction of a federal court with a federal judge. But we need to keep in mind that in 1859, 1860, each state was seen in many ways ascendant to the federal government. That the federal government truly was still the small compact that had been developed in the 18th century. And that was still very much the perspective in 1859 and 1860. And so it really wasn't that atypical or unusual for Buchanan to hand him over to what he thought was a true jurisdiction.
3 years later, Jackson is back at Harpers Ferry. And, what's he doing on Schoolhouse Ridge in September 1862?
Well, he's following Robert E. Lee's orders. What we're here, just in context, this is the first invasion of the North. Now, this is sometimes referred to as the Maryland Campaign. We need to stop calling it the Maryland Campaign. When we call it the Maryland Campaign, the insinuation is that Lee was coming into Maryland to fight in Maryland, expecting battle in Maryland, that he was going to whip the Yankee Army in Maryland. None of that's true. None of it. If you had a chance to read my book, September Suspense, Lincoln's Union in Peril, you would discover that Maryland was just simply a passage. He intended to get out of Maryland as quickly as possible, and he was going to Pennsylvania. Well, there was a problem going into Pennsylvania, and it's right in front of it. It's called Harpers Ferry. Harpers Ferry is not in Pennsylvania, granted. It's in Virginia in 1862. There's no such thing as West Virginia in September of 1862. But Lee cannot go into Pennsylvania because he's got a problem behind him in his rear at Harper's Ferry. And that problem, it amounts to, in essence, an entire Yankee corps of about 14,000 men are in the rear of the Confederate Army. Now, Lynn, you don't have to be a West Point graduate or VMI graduate to understand you never want the enemy in your rear, ever. These people at Harper's Ferry were a real problem for Lee. They could cut off his avenue of supply and communications as he went north. And even worse, if Lee got in trouble in Pennsylvania and needed to come back to Virginia, these people at Harper's Ferry could potentially block his line of retreat. We had to get rid of them. They had to go. And they didn't move on their own, which completely baffled General Lee. He couldn't understand, why don't they just leave? They didn't. So Lee comes up with, all of you out there know this one. I could ask you to name for me an order that Robert E. Lee issues by number. And this is the only one you probably can name for me by number, other than General Orders number 8. Special orders, and that's plural, it's never special orders, special orders, because it's a series of orders that Lee has been issuing throughout the year in 1862 for the Army of Northern Virginia. Special Orders 191 sends 2/3 of the Confederate Army. Now, let me repeat that. 2 out of every 3 rebels is on their way to Harper's Ferry to get rid of this problem in General Lee's rear. This is no sideshow. Harper's Ferry is the show. We've got to get rid of these people. And of course, he chooses Jackson to command the operation for lots of reasons. He needs somebody that can move quickly with alacrity. But he primarily chose Jackson because Jackson knows Harper's Ferry. A lot of people don't realize that Jackson's very first command of the Civil War coming out of VMI, he went to Richmond and he's assigned in Richmond to Harper's Ferry. And all of a sudden, Thomas Jonathan Jackson, Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson, Colonel in the Virginia Militia, has 8,000 men under his command. The artillery professor and the natural philosophy professor suddenly in charge of 8,000 men focused at Harper's Ferry in the spring of 1861. So he knows this place. And all of you, of course, have heard of the Stonewall Brigade. The 2nd, 4th, 5th, 27th, 33rd Virginia regiments. Well, Jackson becomes brigadier in command of this brigade, the 1st Virginia Brigade. And where does he train them? At Harper's Ferry. I often tell people, the stones of that wall that stood on the plains of Henry Hill That stone wall was built at Harpers Ferry. And so Jackson knows the place. He's intimately familiar with it. Lee knows this, and that's the reason he chooses Jackson to carry out Special Orders 191.
191, people have argued about it over the years, and they've talked about was it efficiently conducted and so forth. In your opinion, was the maneuver well managed or was it mismanaged? And if it was mismanaged, who's at fault?
I won't use the word mismanagement. I don't agree with that. But I will say this, that Lee and Jackson, both of them underestimated what would be required to make 191 happen. Basically, they got behind schedule, way behind schedule. Now, I'm going to make a statement. I want everybody to listen to this. If Jackson had executed 191 as detailed, meaning that the entire operation in Harpers Ferry was to be completed by September the 12th. Now, 190, a couple of dates here real quick. September 9th, 191 is issued. September 10th, 2/3 of the Confederate Army in 3 different pincers starts to move towards the ferry, coming from 3 different directions of the compass. A total of about 30,000 men in Confederates. They're going to think of Harpers Ferry as a triangle. They're going to have to take the mountains, which form a triangle around Harpers Ferry. They got to take those mountains. You got 2 rivers in between. You got a Federal Army there. It's all supposed to be done, Lynn, in 3 days. This includes marching from Frederick, maneuvering at Harpers Ferry, seizing the mountains, destroying the Federal Army or forcing it to capitulate, and then rejoining Lee. That was all supposed to be done in 3 days. All supposed to be done in 3 days. Jackson's force itself, riding through Maryland to get to Schoolhouse Ridge, that is a 54-mile march just to get there, the route that he took. 54 miles.
Yeah.
And so my point is that they both of them underestimated the amount of time required to make this happen. So here's the significant thing. September the 12th is supposed to be done. The Confederate Army doesn't begin to arrive at Harpers Ferry until September the 13th. They don't arrive until the 13th. The pincher on the 3 mountains doesn't start to form until the 13th. They don't entrap the Federal Army until the 13th. They're way behind schedule. Now you might say, well, this doesn't make any difference. I mean, who cares? Because the Federal Army's not anywhere close. Wrong. The Federal Army, McClellan, is not where he's supposed to be. McClellan's supposed to be, according to Lee's thinking, and again, they're underestimating here. In this case, they're underestimating, I can't believe I'm going to say this, they're underestimating George McClellan. McClellan, yes, that is worth a laugh. I can hear everybody out there laughing about what I just said. Robert E. Lee actually underestimated George McClellan. Now that puts a lump in my throat. That is a hard thing to say. But sometimes even historians have to face reality. And General Lee screwed up on this. McClellan has moved from Washington to Frederick. And on September the 3rd, I mean, the very fact that McClellan is moving, that's an oxymoron. That's a definition of an oxymoron. McClellan is moving. But he's come to Frederick. And of course, on September the 13th, we all know what happens. You all know the story. 191, there it is. It's out in the field along the Monocacy River. It's picked up by Yankee soldiers. It goes all the way up to high command, and George McClellan, as he would write to the President of the United States, and I quote, "I have all the plans of the rebels, and I will catch them in their own trap." And so here's the deal. If Jackson had been on time and Lee had not underestimated the time required, it didn't make any difference if Special Orders 191 was found on September the 13th, because theoretically the whole operation was over by September the 12th. But that's the theoretical part. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. And it gave McClellan the opportunity to use those lost orders to put Lee and Jackson in a real bind.
John Bonasinga has asked, he wanted to know if Stonewall's success at Harper's Ferry was more attributable to Stonewall's skills or was it more Miles' poor defensive arrangements?
Great question. Great question, John. Oh man, I've gotten that question a lot from people, and I've asked myself that question. Now, when you read typical history of this affair in this campaign, Miles is seen as an old regular Army drunkard who was no competition for Jackson. And Jackson had no competition from Dixon Miles, who was this old Army drunkard. So neither one of them get any credit for what they actually did. You come on this tour, you will hear me. I like controversy, and I like to create controversy. I like to generate controversy. So you come on this tour with me, I will convince you that Dixon Miles did a great job. Oh yeah, I'm not going to try to do that on this screen. He did a great job. Consider this, Lynn, you're a military veteran. You spent decades in the United States Air Force. You know what a raw recruit is. You know what a rookie is. Well, Dixon Miles, nearly 3/4 of his men had been in the Army for less than 3 weeks. That's who was fighting Stonewall Jackson. So what do you expect? So by the time you're finished hearing me talk about Dixon Miles, you're going to look at it a whole different way. On the other hand, Jackson, I argue this. Now, this is going to turn some people upside down and backwards, but I will argue it. And come on, bring it on. Let's go. I will argue that this is Stonewall Jackson's greatest victory of the war. When we say it again, this is Jackson's greatest victory of the war as a battle. His greatest campaign of the war, campaign in totality, is the 1862 Valley Campaign. I'm not challenging that. But his greatest single battle is Harpers Ferry. Now, all you Chancellorsville aficionados out there, and I know there's a lot of you, will say, well, what about Chancellorsville? I mean, wasn't that Jackson's greatest battle? Well, let me ask you a question. Did Stonewall Jackson succeed at Chancellorsville?
No, he didn't. He didn't.
No, he did not. That's the reason he got shot.
He didn't complete the general's orders.
Yeah,
he didn't complete Lee's orders.
Well, and not only that, he never made it to the fords. His purpose was to get to the fords and to cut off the federal retreat. Right? That's what it was all about. It wasn't just to turn the flank, get to the fords and trap them. Don't let them get away. Well, Joe Hooker's army got away, didn't it? Yeah, it did. So, the flank march is brilliant. Jackson's attack on May the 2nd is brilliant, but it wasn't completed. The federal army actually stopped him. That's the reason he was out there reconnoitering that night, that he got shot. He got stopped. It was not successful ultimately in what Lee's grand plan was. And so, Harper's Ferry, you know what the miracle of Special Order 191 is, Lynn? It works. It worked.
Yeah.
Jackson
You're right.
did it. He made it work, considering all the circumstances, all the difficulties, all the obstacles, and the fact the enemy had the orders in their hands. Jackson still made it work. It is an unbelievable, brilliant performance by Stonewall Jackson, and he gets no credit for it because history says he was up against a 60-year-old drunkard. None of that's true. You come on this tour and we'll talk about what the truth is.
Let's not pick on 60-year-old guys. I don't think we're too bad. Hey, Bob Carlson wanted to piggyback on that question. Was this not almost shooting ducks in a pond? Wasn't Harper's Ferry ostensibly completely undefensible?
No, not at all. You do need to hold. You need to hold the high ground. That's a principle war. You must hold, whether the high ground is a sand dune or a desert dune or Maryland Heights overlooking Harper's Ferry. You've got to hold the high ground. Colonel Miles defended the high ground. He had his best troops on Maryland Heights. He had his most experienced subordinate commander on Maryland Heights. He fought to hold the high ground, and he lost the high ground. The Confederates they took it. And so then it became a matter of how long can we hold, considering that the enemy now has the high ground. Well, again, you come on this tour, you'll be surprised at how long not only did they hold, but how much longer they possibly could have held. And I will show you. I love to do terrain studies. Any of you known me and been on my tours before, you hear me say over and again, terrain, terrain, terrain. That's not to rain. That's Terrain. The land will speak to you. The land will talk to you. You need to stop and listen to the land. The land is more important than any official record that was ever written. Stop and watch and listen to and hear the land. It will speak to you. You know, well, you're in the Air Force. You're bombing the land. So you're way up above the land. But a good infantry officer, the first thing an infantry officer is taught, what is the landscape? I must know the landscape. Artillerymen know landscape very well. And so when we don't have Professor Lowe here in his balloon up above dropping bombs on top of us, you know, the land is really essential. And so, no, Harpers Ferry is the bottom of a bowl. The town's in the bottom of this massive hole. In fact, the original name of Harpers Ferry was the unglorified hole. It was called the hole. But you could still hold Harpers Ferry for a long time, even if you lost the high ground. And Miles did. And again, come on this tour and we'll talk about how Miles defended. And boy, he perplexed and really gave Jackson a fit. And it's so much more fun to explain it when I can show you the terrain and you can stand there and you can see what Miles was thinking and how successful he was in that thinking.
Let me ask you one more question about the Harpers Ferry operation. Another speculation, you spent so many years looking at this and from so many different angles and stuff. I'm actually really envious of you. I mean, of the places to live, to be able to live in what I think is probably the finest, purest major battlefield in Antietam, and then you have Harpers Ferry and all the other things around here and stuff. But in all your years of contemplating this and so forth, was the prize worth the price? Was the taking of Harpers Ferry worth Antietam?
Lee never intended to stand at Sharpsburg. That's another myth. The whole idea that General Lee intended to defend a position at the Antietam Creek is not true at all. I mean, on September the 14th, day of the Battle of South Mountain, General Lee issued orders to his forces to withdraw from South Mountain that night. They had had a tough day up there. He knew he wasn't going to be able to hold those gaps the next day. He knew it. He was outnumbered. He had to get out of there. Harpers Ferry still hasn't capitulated. Lee's in a bad position. His army is split in all kinds of just terrible situation for Lee. He never had anything like it. He had never faced any situation like this. September 14th, the night of September 14th was the worst day of Lee's life as a commander of the army up to that point. And it's kind of hard. I mean, there's other days like that, you know, the Pickett Pettigrew charge would equal September the 14th. That night of South Mountain. It was bad. Lee doesn't say, let's go to the Antietam Creek and make a stand. No. General Lee says, we're getting out of here. This invasion is over. We are finished. I don't understand what McClellan's doing. Why is McClellan even here? He's supposed to be in Washington. What's he doing out here? I can't get to Pennsylvania. Harper's Ferry, Jackson's behind schedule. They haven't given up, no white flags. This is a heck of a mess. Let's go home. And so when they left South Mountain, the plan was, we're going back to Virginia. And the route to go through Virginia was through Sharpsburg. They were going to march through Sharpsburg. That's the most direct route. From Boonesboro, South Mountain, through Sharpsburg, to Shepherdstown, across the river into Virginia, and we'll bring everybody back together again in Virginia, and then we'll try again somewhere. That's what the plan is on the night of September 1450. It's not to make a stand at Sharpsburg. What changes that, Lynn? What made Lee reverse that decision? Because that was his decision. I mean, I could show it to you in writing. He sent out orders saying, we're going home. What made Lee change his mind was Harper's Ferry.
Jackson says 24 more hours.
Well, Jackson sends him a note and says that he believes Harpers Ferry will surrender on the morrow, which would have been the 15th of September. And Lee receives that message while his troops were resting. They were resting, Lynn, along the Antietam Creek. Lee had every intention of continuing the withdrawal, and then he receives this note from Jackson that gave him hope. At that point, Lee says, okay, let's stop. Let's wait. Let's see what we learn from General Jackson. And of course, a few hours later, great news arrives. Harpers Ferry has surrendered. And at that point, Lee does not do this. Lee does not say, and with all due respect to Dr. Freeman, Douglas Southall Freeman, I'm taking on a giant here. Robert E. Lee does not say, we shall make our stand on these hills. No. Why? He's going to Pennsylvania. Why? He doesn't gain anything by standing in Maryland and fighting in Maryland. Nothing. We've got to get to Pennsylvania. I want all of you tonight, when this program's over in a few minutes, to go look at a map. Just go look at a map for a moment. I want you to find Sharpsburg. You know where it is. Find Sharpsburg in Western Maryland and look at how close the Pennsylvania line is. I mean, it's that close. Lee's that close to Pennsylvania at Sharpsburg. At Sharpsburg, 15 miles. He's in Pennsylvania, 15 miles. And so the real plan is not to fight, not to stand. The real plan is wait. We're going to wait for General Jackson. 2/3 of my army is at Harpers Ferry. You boys get up here. Come on, let's go. Get up here and join me. McClellan's on the other side of the Antietam Creek. He's going to stay there. I don't care. He's not going to bother me. He's not coming across that creek. That creek is his Maginot line. He's not going to cross the creek. You come up here, we reunite the army. You know what we're going to do next, Lynn? We're going to move. We're going to Pennsylvania. Well, why didn't he go to Pennsylvania? This is a hard thing to say. George McClellan blocked him.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's why
you're precisely right.
That's why we have the Battle of Antietam. George McClellan blocked his route to Pennsylvania along the Sharpsburg Pike. And Lee got stuck. And so Harpers Ferry, was it worth it? The answer is yeah, because Lee needed his rear free from the enemy to achieve his objective, which always was Pennsylvania. Always was Pennsylvania. And he thought it was too risky to keep a whole Yankee Corps in Virginia in his rear along his line of supply, along his line of communication, and along his line of retreat. He had to get rid of them. He does. Jackson succeeds. He goes to reunite the army at Sharpsburg. He's 15 miles from Pennsylvania. All looks good. And then George McClellan does the unspeakable, and from Lee's point of view, the unthinkable. George McClellan on September the 16th crossed the Antietam Creek with nearly a third of his army that was with him at that time. Nearly a third of the Army of the Potomac crosses on September the 16th, seizes the Hagerstown Turnpike, and it's all over. No more invasion. And that's when he caught Sharpsburg.
I'm going to try to fit two more quick questions in. We'll see if we can get them in, depending on how you answer. The first one, Joe Fafera asked. He was a big fan of Joe Harsh's, and of course, Joe affected everybody. And I remember talking to Joe once down in Hilton Head. We were doing a program down there, and he had just finished with his works on Lee and those wonderful, wonderful works that he did. And he said, I did this for the purposes of setting up my real interest, which was the study of George McClellan. Of course, bless his heart, he left us far too soon. Do you hear anything, or is there anybody on the horizon who is likely to complete that McClellan study of the McClellan in the campaign? Do you hear anything?
Well, I knew Joe very, very well. Great friend of mine. Joe as a kid, was a member of the Hagerstown Civil War Round Table. I, as a kid, was a member of that same round table. Now we're a different generation, but I had the greatest admiration and respect for Joe Harsh. Great scholar, and a great thinker. Joe was a thinker. He really was a defender of McClellan when no one else would dare defend McClellan. And that really was his interest. He wanted to look at this campaign principally from McClellan's point of view and try to redeem McClellan's reputation. Almost an impossible task, but he wasn't afraid of the impossible. And that never happened, of course. He did do all of his work on Lee and the Confederate Army. As you say, it was a setup for what he really hoped to be able to write. And I'm not aware of anyone who is taking his work. There are others now that have certainly used much of Joe's scholarship to further Joe's thinking. But I don't know of anyone who's actually planning to do the same kind of thing that Joe was.
Sure. Well, it's a giant shoes to step into, and it requires quite a bit of commitment and chutzpah to sit back and try to step into something that would mirror what Joe did with his works on Lee.
Yeah, Let me finish. It would be like trying to find another Ed Bars to go raise another KO. That would be that's basically what that is.
I think that's a fair analogy. Last question. We have one of our folks. He's appeared on several of these, and I don't know who he is. He uses a screen name of Marcus Colonius, and I suppose I'm going to have to look up who Marcus Colonius is, because
was this a great Roman emperor at one time, Marcus Colonius?
Yeah. I think, well, he has to be. If his name's Marcus, he's bound to be Roman, and Colonius just sounds like the right kind of thing. But anyway, Marcus Colonius has asked, he said, literature and film portray Brown as crazed to the point of lunacy. We know that he was prone to violence. Is this a fair representation of Brown, or in your studies and experience, was he more charismatic than that and perhaps more of an orator?
Well, he was very charismatic. As example, I've read so many accounts where Brown could freeze you. His eyes were steel blue and they looked right through you. His eyes penetrated right into your soul. But the trouble was, they didn't just penetrate into your soul, he grabbed your soul. And so, when Brown was in front of you, and incidentally, he very seldom looked like this. This is the most famous illustration of Brown, the man that looks like Moses with the long beard. But he almost never had this. This was just a short period in his life where he had this long beard. When he came to Harpers Ferry, he didn't have any beard at all. When we see portrayals of him in Harpers Ferry with a beard, they're all wrong. There are numerous photographs there you go. There. That's a more classic John Brown right there. Look at those eyes. Look at those eyes.
The shine in them.
You're not going to walk away from that man without having some sort of memory. Yeah, you're not. Even if he never talks to you, he looks at you. You're not going to forget that. Brown, there's no question Brown is a leader. There's no question that he is full of charisma, that he's magnetic, and he is committed. He is absolutely devoted to the eradication of slavery. Now, he also believes this, and this is important when you understand Brown, and we'll talk a lot about this when you join us on the tour. Brown is a very religious man. Now, I don't mean that in terms of dedicated to a specific denomination. That's not the case at all. He's dedicated to God. And it's absolute. He is convinced, he believes that he has a direct connection to God. There's nothing in between. There's no pope, there's no minister. It's John Brown and God. And God has placed Brown on this earth with mission, with purpose within him. And it's God's purpose. It's God's mission. Brown's just the instrument. Brown's just the tool to perform God's mission. And that mission was the eradication of slavery in the United States of America. We've all been through experiences of people who are not unlike this. We know, not personally, but we know of people that in our own lives that feel they have this direct connection. And Brown believed that God would defend him, God would protect him, God would direct him. It was God who brought Brown to Harpers Ferry. It's God who brought Brown to Virginia. It's God who is going to lead Brown in this war. This is God's war against slavery, and Brown is his captain. Brown never called himself general, ever. He called himself Captain Brown, and Captain Brown will be God's victor.
Boy, you can't finish on a stronger note than that. Dennis, every time we get together and we spend time, we both learn something, and it is just a real pleasure to share all this time with you in this hour with you as well. I know just the massive amount of information and insight that we got in just an hour is pretty amazing, and I hope people really appreciate how special this was. For those of you who are so inclined, July 31st, August 1st, registration is open. We'd love to have you there. In the meantime, Dennis, thank you so much. You're always a gentleman, and you teach me so much. Thanks for joining us.
Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.